Right, so then just remind me to talk about National Voter Registration Day about 3 or 4 times during the course of the of the event then. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Liz from YouthLink Scotland. We've got a great workshop today around the general election and fake news. Today is National Voter Registration Day, so you have until 11:59 tonight to register to vote, to encourage the young people that you're working with to register to vote. Hello, welcome. So yeah, you've got until just before midnight to get everyone you know to register to vote, and we hope this session will help to connect our youth work practice with why we might want to engage with young people around the general election, understand some of the real challenges in this time around media and media literacy and misinformation, and sort of give us all some tools how we can have sort of really good conversations with young people around making informed decisions around the election and talking about the election in a way that's really supports them to make their informed decision in this current climate as well. So yes, just another reminder, get people signed up to to vote. And we're also supporting the Give and X campaign, which is around young people vote, getting young people to register to vote, and also to use that registration when it comes to the day of the election. So the plan for the session is we've got 3 brilliant speakers coming to give inputs. Then we're going to have some discussion time, and at the end a Q&A for across the group. So we've got Emily from YouthLink Scotland, Amanda from Shout Out UK, and Evie from Ofcom. Thank you so much for coming to share with us. So I'll start off by introducing Emily. So Emily is our children's rights lead at YouthLink Scotland, and she's going to be sort of sharing some thoughts around political literacy, children's rights, and the role of youth work.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, hi everybody, good afternoon. Really, we wanted to start off with this part of the presentation just as a bit of framing to think about, well, where does youth work sit? Where does this sit in relation to children's rights? It's obviously for Evie and Amanda, sorry, you're not in the really exciting wave of coming into incorporation next month, only a few weeks away until the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is incorporated into Scots law. So it's a really good time to be thinking of this and using that as a framing. Though I wanted to start out with this piece of research, which was actually done with young people in England and Wales. I think it was conducted in February, but it was released last week, showing a real lack of political knowledge and understanding. So about 70% of young people under 18 didn't know who their MP was. They didn't know which party their MP belonged to. They didn't know which issues mattered most to their representative, though I think if that was done with adults, it'd probably be fairly similar, if I'm honest. And that they didn't understand, 2 in 5, I think it was, don't understand what politicians actually do. So if we think that young people don't have this basic knowledge, how can we expect that they're actually able to influence and take part in changing things, which is what we're all about as youth workers. So starting off with that rights framing, maybe in the center there's the one that we're all most familiar with, and we talk about and reference all the time within youth work, that children have a right to have their voice heard, and for that view to be respected and to be considered in decision making that affects them. But connected to that, and we know that all the rights, human rights, are interconnected and interdependent, that if one's missing, they're all impacted. So connected really closely to that is the right to access to accurate information, really pertinent to the conversation today. Also to freedom of thought and expression, and also really crucially about the best interests, right? That decisions made that matter to children, that involve them, are in their best interests. And I'm quite sure we could think of quite a few decisions that are not, that are made in the political realm. But if we think of this piece as kind of really the main focus of underlying political literacy for young people. So where do youth workers fit into this? After the EU referendum, so kind of it was in that time before we had actually left the EU, but after the Brexit vote, YouthLink did a little small piece of research in partnership with Youth Scotland about the youth work sector's feelings around the EU referendum and Brexit. And as part of that, we were thinking about political literacy, because it was something that we'd heard quite a lot from youth workers that was difficult, because they were being told not to in some cases. And so we really asked that simple question: well, did you do work with young people about Brexit from the, before the EU referendum to the time that we did the survey? And it was really split about half-half. 45% of respondents had not provided information to young people, and 42 said they had. And there was the in-between number said they weren't sure, which I'm guessing means they probably hadn't, if they weren't quite sure. And reasons that people gave for that was about a lack of confidence. They didn't understand it well enough themselves to feel that they could pass that information on. It wasn't a priority either for them personally as a worker or for their organization. It was not allowed, or it was actually dissuaded by their seniors or by their kind of organization. That was really common in local authorities as well, in particular. And then the final point that people raised was that the young people that they were working with were too young to vote, and therefore they didn't do that work. And now we know for this general election coming up, it's only those who are 18 or over who can vote. But obviously in a few years coming up, Scottish election, parliamentary elections, young people aged 16 and over will be able to vote. So where's the sticking ground there? Or what's actually the case? What are youth workers able to do around political literacy? Well, our view is it's really youth workers have a responsibility to do this work, to support young people's political understanding and engagement in politics from that neutral standpoint. We're not saying you should support one party over another, but really of like, these are the issues, this is how the process works, this is how you can be engaged, this is how you can have your voice be heard, and also facilitating some of that. And we can see that that's really embedded within the occupational standards for youth work, about those values and beliefs and exploring that, becoming responsible citizens, and also being able to advocate with young people as well. And of course, within our youth work outcomes and skills framework, we can see that it's relevant to so many parts of these skills and outcomes that young people develop through youth work. So about being, of course, we've just mentioned about active citizens, enabling change, about looking after themselves as well, I would argue. Politics affects them in many different ways. About taking leadership, making rational decisions, being able to understand why they're making all of these points. So there's lots of ways that it's really grounded within youth work practice to be engaging young people in political literacy. And I just wanted to finish with this quote that when I was looking back over the HERE EU report, I found really was applicable to this time now as well. And it was from Dave Beck, who's a lecturer in community development at the University of Glasgow. And he said that youth work is needed to help rebuild a vibrant participatory democracy where there are spaces to think, challenge, and hold all accountable for shaping our collective future. As youth workers, work in ways that support young people to learn, to take responsibility, to challenge constructively, to listen and to compromise, we develop the building blocks for a truly democratic society. I think Dave's quote is really nice to show of actually all those different aspects that we do through youth work that might not always be labeled as political literacy, but are really there as that foundational basis for understanding and participating in politics. And so I hope that's a nice framing to start the session today, that we know this is definitely youth work's place to be involved with, and youth workers shouldn't shy away from this. And certainly if there are any senior youth work decision makers here, or that you know of that have a problem with this, send them to us. We can speak to them, and talk about the importance of why youth work's involved in this, because if we're not having these conversations with young people, there might not be anybody else doing it. I'll pass back over to Liz. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was brilliant. And thank you for really highlighting our role and our place in this. Yeah, totally. If we don't have these conversations, who is? Is it Cambridge Analytica? Is it, a foreign power that's creating fake news content, or launching cyber attacks? Or is it someone on TikTok? So I think we'll hear a lot more about that from Amanda and from Evie as well. Yeah, that's brilliant. And in our values, as youth workers in our whole ecosystem, it's around, you know, social justice, equity, and our role and empowerment, and our role in supporting young people to take power and control of their lives through every means they can, including the democratic processes available to them. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce Amanda from Shout Out UK, who's going to share sort of the thoughts, research and resources around responding to misinformation and disinformation as sort of a key challenge within the upcoming election. Thank you for joining us, Amanda.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And just to echo Liz's and Emily's points about the fact that, you know, this is youth workers space. You are the trusted messengers when it comes to young people about these types of issues. And so it's really important that we're having these conversations. So I'm going to try and address a little bit some of the kind of challenges and barriers that people might have when it comes to having these conversations, and what you can kind of do to empower your staff and your teams, and to have those conversations with young people. So just to give a bit of context about where I'm coming from. So I work for an organisation called Shout Out UK, and we work nationwide and also internationally, and we focus on media and political literacy. So that's kind of our bread and butter, and we do this across different campaigns, some of them around voter registration, some of them around disinformation, some of them around media literacy, but always with that kind of focus in mind. And my background in particular is within teaching, and I was a teacher for 8 years. So definitely working with young people is at the forefront of a lot of our work, and it's something super important to do. And the reason that misinformation, and you might have seen it coming up quite a lot in terms of the news recently, is because in the context of the general election, it's really important that we're addressing a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that's out there online. And this is from the UK Parliament just on the 23rd of May, so really, really recent. They were talking about the cybersecurity of elections, and the risk of mis and disinformation is one of the kind of major threats to a general election, but also just in terms of how the public kind of perceives politics, perceives their kind of active role and their kind of own place in society is really, really crucial to kind of instill a lot of the positive messaging about how people can become active citizens, and especially in a time and a context where people are incredibly distrustful of politics and politicians. It's really important that we're getting that message across, that it's not just kind of a waste to participate in these things, that actually we really do need to be collectively involved and having our voices heard with this. So when it comes to mis and disinformation, there is a kind of distinction between the two terms, misinformation being false information that's spread by mistake, whereas disinformation is spread on purpose, but they are both kind of false information. We're seeing obviously a massive change in technology. We're seeing deep fake technology, AI generation of images, AI generation of videos as well. And all of that, as well as the kind of differences in the way that the algorithms have changed on social media, has really changed essentially the way that people are engaging with dis and misinformation, and really at this point have so much access to mis and disinformation that goes pretty much unchecked. So it's really important that we're having these conversations so that people feel confident in being able to spot some of these false kind of news or stories that are appearing. And one of the two kind of main ways that disinformation and misinformation can impact elections is through eroding trust in online news, democratic institutions, election processes. And we see this a lot when you consider when we're having conversations with young people, there's so much distrust, especially of mainstream media sources, mainstream outlets. There's a huge kind of wave of conspiracy theories. There's so much content on conspiratorial thinking that we're seeing online. When you talk to young people, they'll probably be able to name way more conspiracy theories than they would be able to name MPs. And that's just because of the type of content they're going to get online. It's not necessarily a case of blaming young people for this. It's just essentially the kind of circumstances they're working within. But also what's happening with the kind of evolution of these algorithms is that we're having way more polarizing content. And with echo chambers, with the way that algorithms work in terms of having posts that get more engagement, get to the kind of top of your For You page, even if that engagement is actually really negative, it's really polarizing. That is an issue that we kind of need to address. And a lot of the times, young people know a lot of things about the algorithms and they know how to train them themselves. They do a lot of work when we talk to them about how they're kind of manipulating the algorithm itself. But sometimes those conversations are not necessarily happening in a kind of I guess safe space where young people can talk to trusted messengers about how those different technologies can work and how they can potentially influence opinions. But seeing as this has been taken so seriously by kind of on a national level, when we're thinking about it being a national security issue, it's super important that we're taking this seriously as well in terms of how we're able to engage with young people. And it's not just young people who are going to fall victim to this, it's everyone. But we really want to make sure that the next generation are not kind of disenfranchised because of these changes. So it's important to note that this is the first general election with TikTok as a battleground, and I'm sure you've probably come across, or maybe you've heard young people talking about different TikToks that they've come across, which has like highly political content on there. There's lots of different parties that are really, really active on TikTok. I think it was this morning, a TikTok of Suella Braverman, who has done like a whole kind of campaign video. There's lots of discussions around reform using TikTok as like one of their main channels to target young people as well. And essentially all the major political parties are churning out constant TikTok videos to the point where most people, I think it was a stat that the BBC had recently put out, that about they've got a kind of program going on at the moment that I'm going to touch on in just a second. But it was about 1 in 10 kind of videos that people were coming across were somewhat politically charged. So it's really important to remember that young people will be coming across political content in their day-to-day kind of social media use. And so it's important that we're addressing that because a lot of the time the way that young people are consuming social media will be in the kind of private space in their bedroom or on the sofa or something, just kind of scrolling through without having that interaction or having that kind of communal discussion around what they're actually consuming. And a lot of that consumption can be quite passive, almost using social media as like a kind of like almost like a TV type screen, and not necessarily engaging critically with what they might be coming across online. And that's definitely not just true of young people, that's true of everyone that's using social media because of the nature and how it's changed in terms of kind of use of it. So to kind of think now about how we might be trying to address these concerns that we might have around misinformation, disinformation, one of the kind of key ways of addressing this always comes out as pre-bunking. So you might have heard of the term debunking, which is when you've got already like a piece of misinformation, so some kind of fake news, and then you kind of analyze it, look at how that is fake, look at the fact checking behind it, what you can do. But actually it's pre-bunking, so it's almost doing the work beforehand. And the metaphor that people use for this, or the analogy that people use for this, is almost like it's a vaccine. It's a vaccine that you take before you see false information, which allows you to not take it in the first place. And this is always in the research that we've seen come across as like the highest possible, most effective method for kind of combating mis and disinformation. And there's two types of ways that you can pre-bunk when it comes to different techniques. So for example, you can do issue-based approach. So when we consider COVID, for example, there was a lot of misinformation around COVID, about different kind of false claims around the vaccine, how that would look, and a lot of false claims around how things were spread as well. And the government put out a lot of information, which is essentially issue-based pre-bunking, where they were explaining how COVID worked in order for people to be informed on the issue, so that it wouldn't be persuaded by disinformation or misinformation on that subject. Whereas technique-based approach tends to be looking at the tactics that people use in order to kind of persuade you of something. So whether that's potentially manipulating using kind of emotionally charged materials, that would be a kind of technique-based approach where you're explaining to young people or through activities, showing them how different manipulation tactics can be used in order to persuade someone of something that's not actually true. And so there's lots of different ways that you can kind of do this if you're trying to do a kind of activity with young people. Something that I've done quite a bit with young people is getting like people into a group and getting them to try and persuade, if they had to persuade 1,000 people that they were an alien, how would they do it? And so then doing that kind of exercise and getting them to think about what are the techniques that they would be using, like how would they persuade them? And would they drip feed information online? Would they create a deep fake? How would they make it seem legitimate? Would they make it seem like it's been leaked? How would they go about doing that? And getting them to think about that process of manipulation is really, really impactful, because it makes them reflect on how other people might be using those different processes as well of manipulation in their kind of online spheres. So obviously there's so many challenges that people have in terms of how are you going to now start to create loads of different activities to address misinformation. I know youth workers have so much already on their plate that they're trying to address. It seems like just another thing that they've got to think about when there's already so much. But on top of that challenge of just priorities, there's that challenge of how do you remain impartial? How do you talk about politics without trying to persuade in any way? How do you navigate sensitive subjects? And we know there's been so many kind of controversial political topics that people just don't feel comfortable enough bringing to the table, and not sure how to navigate with young people. Sometimes there's a kind of concern of not knowing what to say, not knowing, if somebody especially is coming out with really controversial statements, how do you tackle that in a way that's politically neutral, but also just not feeling knowledgeable enough about the specific subject, and then also not really knowing when to approach the subject. So what point is it too young? What point are you almost like maybe it's too late in the game? So at what point do you kind of do that? And then finally knowing where to signpost. So I'm going to try and go through some of these ideas. Obviously, it's not going to be an exhaustive list of solutions, but it'll hopefully get you to think about some of the possibilities that you might be able to use in your own practice. So first thing is really important is to be curious and to ask questions. And I think this is the really key kind of approach that I would have when talking with young people about politics. And so asking the questions like, where have you heard that information from? Oh, can you show me? Let's have a look at this together. Where, what is that account, for example, posting on other things? Oh, that's interesting that they're doing that because I've seen something that's like this. And having those conversations in a really curious and open way is a really, really key tactic to make young people feel heard, but also to explore and to also model the way that they might also be curious and think critically about something without it necessarily being like a really heavy, serious subject. Another thing that's really important to kind of remember, and this is definitely something that I've learned along the way in my practice, and it's definitely something I really struggled with at the beginning, is having to let go essentially of that idea of having the right answer. You don't need to have a correct answer, the perfect kind of take on every single political subject. That's okay. As long as you're meeting people with empathy, you're listening to people, you're being curious about their beliefs, and you're wanting to connect with them, that is more important than trying to prove somebody wrong in an argument. It's not about trying to get to the right answer or kind of prove to somebody that they're wrong, because ultimately you want to connect over politics. You want people to feel empowered over it, rather than proving something that's not necessarily even got an objective truth or correct answer. Again, like, don't pressure yourself to be like a font of knowledge of everything that's political, or having the answers to everything. It's really important to show, again, like I said, that modeling of fact checking, showing people, like, so maybe they say, oh, who's our MP and what do they stand for? And you can say, oh, I'm actually not sure, but let's have a look together and we can sort out to see what they are voting for currently in Parliament. Showing that curiosity, also showing kind of changing your opinion is really important, because there is that kind of almost black and white sometimes when it comes to the online space of this is the correct opinion and this is the incorrect opinion, and you're going to get cancelled if you don't have that opinion. So it's really important to have that kind of curiosity with it, showing people that they can change their opinion on things, they can change their mind, and you can continue to fact check in a helpful way. And when to have these kind of conversations is important as well, to have those ongoing transparent conversations. You might want to do like a specific activity around politics, maybe you want to do a mock election or something along those lines, but it's important to continue to have these conversations. And even if it's just a conversation of, oh, I saw a TikTok on so-and-so, or I saw an Instagram post on so-and-so, that's a really nice way in to start talking about what are the things that they're seeing. And I'm sure probably the same as the young people that I've worked with, they're always up for a chat about what they're seeing online. So definitely engaging with that is a really important thing to do. And then just finally, to kind of signpost to some resources that are helpful. They Work For You is a really good website that just gives you really factual, impartial information on who your MPs are, what they're voting for, information about how you can contact them. All of that I think is really important to make sure that you've got those kind of impartial resources. But also, like I mentioned earlier, the BBC currently has a great project called BBC's Undercover Voter Project, which is looking at different, they've essentially set up TikTok profiles across the country. And so they are looking at how disinformation can be spread across those different algorithms targeting specific areas. So it's a really nice project as well to kind of use as a springboard for conversation of like, oh, I saw this video through the BBC, and then using that to discuss as well. And then also we've got a campaign that we're currently running with Ofcom and the Electoral Commission, which is called Dismiss. And this is focusing on dismissing political disinformation. And we've got loads of downloadable resources that are all free, so you can use with your young people as well, or signpost it to them, where we kind of look at different political disinformation tactics. We have a dictionary around different terms. We have kind of how to dismiss those different political disinformation tactics. And then finally, we've also got the kind of context in politics and how that looks in politics. Oh, thank you, Hilary, for putting that through. I think I have covered pretty much everything that I wanted to. I was just going to show as well the website, and we've also got animations on there, so you can use those to work with young people and have conversations. I think that's really the most important thing that I wanted to kind of get across, was you don't have to have like the perfect discussion, the perfect kind of way of talking about political literacy. You just have to have a way of talking about political literacy, and as long as you're curious and you're open-minded and you aren't trying to persuade or lobby people to vote a certain way, I think that you'll be absolutely amazing at doing that with your young people, because you're already doing such amazing work with young people. So it's just another facet of doing that.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That's brilliant. And thank you for sharing some really like practical tips and tools and helping sort of get through some of the like I suppose definitions and language and what to think about. It's really helpful, really like practical resources, and I'm sure we'll all be going on your website later to have a look at resources we can use. Thank you. That's brilliant. Great. So next I'd like to introduce Evie Owen from Ofcom. She's going to be sharing around research they've done around understanding young people's view of the news, insights around how children and young people engage with the media, and the role of social media and so on in levels of trust in information. So thank you so much, Evie. And Hilary, you doing slides?
Hi everyone. Sorry, I can see the slides now. Great, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Evie, and I'm going to talk to you about some of Ofcom's media literacy findings in particular what we know about how children engage with news and their understanding of the information that they see online. So many children simply do not engage with news at all. Ofcom's news consumption survey shows that just under half, so 45% of 12 to 15 say they are just not interested in the news at all. But some do have an idea about what's going on in the world around them. So where are they finding out about this? Well, talking with family remains the most common way for 12 to 15s to find out about news. Nearly 7 in 10 said they'd ever done this. And that's followed by TV and talking with friends. But as was mentioned previously, social media was also a commonly cited source of news, with over half of 12 to 15-year-olds saying they'd ever sourced news that way. And when it came to individual news sources across all platforms, among these 12 to 15-year-old news consumers, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram took the top 3 spots, with 28% of 12 to 15-year-old news consumers looking to TikTok and 25% turning to YouTube or Instagram for this purpose. Just to note, that excludes the net figure for the use of all BBC sources, because the BBC comes in so many forms that actually it ends up with a larger proportion of kids who have seen it. Our news consumption survey also showed that only a third of 12 to 15s who ever read or saw news via social media believed that it was always or mostly reported truthfully. That's compared to over 7 in 10 who said the same about news they saw or read on TV, radio, or in newspapers. So they're showing some discernment about the sources they're using. Next slide, please. We explored the trust that children put in the information they see online. So this isn't just news, but generally the information they see online in our CAP study. And our findings back up the NCS in showing that children are more skeptical about the information they see on social media than they are about information on other types of online site. So only a third of 8 to 17 say that all or most of the information they see on social media is true, compared to 2/3 who say this about information found on news sites, and around 3/4 who feel this way about information they see on schools and homework sites. So while it's encouraging to see this nuanced approach and apparently somewhat cautious attitude to social media, it is important to remember that social media is a key source of information for children, and as we saw from the NCS data, tends to be the place where the relatively low proportion of children who do engage with news see it. We also asked 12 to 17s who visit new websites or apps online if they ever think about whether or not they can trust the information they see on these sites. And if they do think about this, what actions, if any, they would take to verify the information. So 9 in 10 told us that they would think about this, which is unchanged from 2022. But we must remember they've been prompted by being asked the question. But a much lower proportion say they would take any of the actions we asked about in order to verify the information. Again, these proportions may well be higher than in real life, again, as a result of being prompted. But it appears that teens are less likely to undertake the more time-consuming actions or those requiring more effort on their part. So while around half say they would ask a friend if they were familiar with the site or consider if the site was created by a company they'd heard of, only a third said they would check some of the information on the site, and only a quarter said they would use a fact-checking website. So what do children know about the way information is fed to them online? Well, 6 in 10 children aged 8 to 17 are aware of the use of algorithms to direct specific content to them. And this increases with the age of the child and the socioeconomic background of the child's family. And just under half of 8 to 17s who do know about the use of algorithms indicated that they don't mind algorithms using their data by agreeing that they were happy for apps to use information they have collected about me to decide what to show me. So quite a high proportion are comfortable with that. We also asked 12 to 17-year-olds in our survey if they were confident in their ability to judge whether what they see online is real or fake. And 7 in 10 said they were confident, unchanged since the previous year. And this claimed confidence was more likely among boys than girls and among 16 to 17s than 12 to 15s. But that said, 16 to 17-year-olds are less likely to say they are confident in their ability to distinguish the real from the fake online than they were last year. So 3/4 of them feel this way versus just over 8 in 10 in 2022. We went on to present these children with several scenarios designed to allow us to assess various aspects of their ability to judge what they see online. And this included showing them a mocked up social media profile and then asking them to tell us if they thought it was genuine or not. 7 in 10 12 to 17s correctly identified that it was a fake profile, with the remainder evenly split between those thinking it was genuine and those who simply didn't know. But 21% of those who had previously said they were confident in their ability to judge the real from the fake online were unable to do so in this case. And conversely, the same proportion of children proved to be able to identify that it was a fake profile, despite not previously being confident in their abilities. So we can infer that teenagers are not always the best judge of their own abilities. So I'm going to finish off with a few findings about young people's experience of mis and disinformation and their use of and attitudes towards AI. We found that 6 in 10 16 to 24-year-old social media users claim to have seen a deliberately untrue or misleading story in the last 12 months. And that's considerably higher than the average among adults as a whole, where we found that just under half, so 45%, said they'd seen dis or misinformation on social media in the last year. Of course, this may be higher. This is when they recognise it for themselves. There was a range of responses among 16 to 24s who had seen this type of content via social media. The most common reaction was to do nothing or simply ignore it and carry on scrolling. While what we would consider to be the ideal response, reporting the content, was carried out by the same proportion of just under 4 in 10 who had come across it. And there were some, just shy of 20%, who, while perhaps well-intentioned and thinking they were doing the right thing by publicly calling it out, might have actually risked further amplifying the story via commenting or sharing on it. These proportions were actually very little different to those for adults as a whole. Turning to AI, we found that nearly half of children have used artificial intelligence technology, and they're twice as likely as adults to have done so. 46% of children aged 8 to 17 say they'd ever used AI, and it was driven by teenagers in the cohort. So 52 and 59% of 12 to 15s and 16 to 17s respectively had used it, compared to a third of 8 to 11s. And over a third of the 8 to 17-year-olds who had used AI technology said they did so either for fun or to learn or for schoolwork. As well as awareness and use of AI, we also explored attitudes towards AI among 16s and over. We asked online adults to imagine they had read an article online which stated that it had been generated or written by AI, and then to tell us whether they would trust that article more or less than one written by a person. While half of adults who are aware of AI said they would trust a human article more, only 14% said they would trust an article written by AI more. But there were some interesting differences when looking at those who have used AI themselves versus those who haven't. AI users were more likely than average to trust an AI article more than a human one, and you can see a much more even split there between those that trusted a human more, trusted AI more, or trusted both the same degree. Conversely, those who've not used AI remained more distrustful and skewed even more towards trusting humans over AI. And as you can also see from the chart, younger adults, 16 to 24s, were more trusting of AI-generated articles than adults as a whole. So I'm going to leave you with this broad overview of the topic areas that Ofcom's media literacy research covers. Of particular relevance to your work may be the topic around trust and accuracy, which we've just scratched the surface of today. And if you'd like to know any more about our media findings, do visit our the media literacy section of our website, or get in touch with me. Hilary's got both of those addresses and emails. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Evie. That was brilliant. What a great insight into young people's experiences and attitudes as well. Thank you so much for sharing that. And